I'm Ryan Cooper, the co-chair of the Docent Advisory Committee. Very excited today because we want to briefly introduce you to two resources that the committee has come up with this year to share with docents that you may be able to use on tour if you wish. So one of our big things this year was focusing on guest engagement, particularly with our school groups. Now, one way that we engage with many groups when they come in, we ask them what they've been doing to prepare, what they've been reading. They tell us what they're reading, and we promptly, usually, do nothing with that information. So, with that, we came up with little literary resource guides that connect stories that schools may be reading in class with items and photos and artifacts from our collection. So we have connections to Diary of Anne Frank using items that are in our museum, and connections to Elie Wiesel's Night, two of our most prominent books that people read when they come here. So how this works, again, I want to reiterate, these are not scripts, these are not required. Use as much or as little of them as you want. It's just an option if you want to tailor your tour to your school group. So here with Diary of Anne Frank, you can look and see different types of things that they went through, passages from the diary that connect with things such as, oh, the dentist from the secret annex was in love with a woman who was Catholic. Well, here it kind of connects and tells the story of, you know, what people who were, relations between Jews and non-Jews were like back then. We also have what will be helpful for people who know the aftermath. We actually have listed the journey that everyone who hid in the secret annex went to in terms of what camps they went to and what happened to them. So that's an easy way, knowing that most people who read these books, that's their big intro to the Holocaust. So instead of just throwing the whole history out there and watching their heads spin, here's a little way to make it a little bit more digestible. You know these people, you know their stories. Here's how it kind of plugs in with the general history. So again, use these, don't use them. We have a limited number of copies on the table in the Docent Lounge currently, but we're eventually going to send these out electronically to you via email for your own perusal. So there we have it. Thank you. Thank you. That's right.
Mark, I think you had something to announce.
Yes, if I can get your attention, I'm sorry it take too long to move my scooter out to get turned around. Just a quick announcement to mark your calendars. A major event is coming. It's on March 25th. It's a Monday at the Missouri History Museum. This is the biannual symposium by the Metro Docent Council. This is representing all docents at all institutions in St. Louis. It's an all-day event from 8:30 in the morning to 2:30. It's free. When you sign up and register online, you mark what food you want. There's a fee for a lunch if you want to buy a lunch. The theme is filling our toolkits, courageous explorations. 3 speakers in a panel, all talking about what we deal with as docents, dealing with inclusion, diversity, and unintended bias when we do our thing. And the keynote speaker is Tabari Coleman, a major speaker with the Anti-Defamation League. He's talking about understanding the challenges and consequences of our words, actions, and behaviors. And that's the general theme of the conference. So we invite you to make plans March 25th. There'll be a flyer that's going to be sent out to all of you, and that will link you to sign up on the internet. And we hope that you can attend. And I am thrilled when I've been to 2 conferences to meet docents through one opportunity from all the other institutions, from the Gateway Arts to the other museums and zoo, and you have a lunch with them and get to know what they do and see what's in common with what us and with the other docents. So I hope that you can attend March 25th.
Thank you. Just a couple of things. Our busy season is upon us. It's just starting. It's going to get busier as we get closer to March, and then busier and busier through March, April, and early May. So please check your calendars, sign up for tours. There'll be plenty of options, both for speakers and for docents. So please do sign up for tours. On your tours, please be flexible, Please be aware of the other docents who are also touring at the same time. It's not the first time I've said this, but timing is really important. Remember, if there's a group in front of you or a group behind you or two groups behind you, the goal is to make sure you're in here, not taking any time away from the survivor speaker. So be very aware of needing to move and working as a team to make sure everyone gets to get through the museum in a satisfactory way.
Can I add to that? So when I book for, like, say 3 groups, I plan on the docents being 15 minutes apart. So that means the docent who goes first should finish their tour and still have 30 minutes left. So they should be out of the museum with 30 minutes left, and with those 30 minutes they can do Change Begins with Me and a video, which the other groups are doing either at the beginning or, you know, half and half. But please, it's not fair to the docents, it's not fair to the students and the other groups when they don't get the full museum because of someone else's pacing.
Also, let me say something about the round-robin tours that you've been hearing about. They are used only for groups that are very, very large. And it's in the experience of the 3 so far. They've been very successful. The teachers are pleased with them. The students seem to be energized and like them. And the docents who've chosen to do them have found that they work. Not every docent is going to want to do them. It does require that you repeat your talk about a certain area of the museum how many times?
6.
6 times. It's not going to be for everyone, but if you think it might be something you would want to do, talk to Lori and she'll make sure you have a chance to either observe it or talk to someone who's done it several times. And again, for groups who really, in past years, we would have had to either say, well, go through on your own, and we'll put docents on duty, which meant they just ran through and got on their phones. Or we would have had to say no. So this is not only a way to let them have tours, but it's something that's been very effective. So don't dismiss it out of hand. Think if it's something you might want to do. If it's really not for you, that's fine, but consider it. Anything else you want to say about that, Lori, or anyone else? I think we've got a few coming up, correct?
Yes, there are 2 on February 22nd, 1 on February 26th, and 4 or 5 in March.
So there are many, many events coming up here at the museum. I think between now and mid-May, there's something every single weekend. I'm not going to list them all. Let me remind you of the opening of Gregor's Violin. That will be this Sunday at 1:30 with a performance using Gregor's Violin, played actually by Gregor's granddaughter, Tova Breitberg, who will be performing with her father Misha on viola. That will be at 2 o'clock. That same performance is going to happen on March 17th. So if you can't come this week, which is going to be very, very crowded, feel free to switch over and come on March 17th, which will also be an opportunity to celebrate Gregor's widow Shifra's 100th birthday. So that also will be a very special event. March 17th at probably the same time. Without further ado, it's my honor and pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Stephen Lefrak. Dr. Stephen Lefrak had been until 4 years ago, been a full-time faculty member of the Washington University Department of Medicine since 1971, and a professor of medicine in the Division of Pulmonary and Critical Care Medicine since 1984. Dr. Lefrak has served as the Assistant Dean and director of the Humanities Program in Medicine since its inauguration in 1990, and he also served as medical director and principal attending physician of the medical intensive care unit at Jewish Hospital. He has served many roles as historian, ethicist, patient advocate, physician advocate, and premier intensivist, which I need to ask you what that is, but I'll ask you after. Dr. Lefrak continues to make contributions to medical education with lectures on ethics and medical history. One initiative I particularly want to mention is, it's happened for, I guess, 30 years now, or close to 30 years, the annual medical grand rounds, which focuses on the Holocaust and the involvement of medicine throughout the genocidal process. I believe that is still going on, correct? Absolutely. So we usually hear about it if you're an early riser. It's been some wonderful, wonderful programming over at the hospital. Dr. Lefrak has been a friend and supporter of the Holocaust Museum and Learning Center since its inception. He's participated in docent training, in educators' workshops, and enrichment programs and presentations. Some really incredible programming that he contributed during the Deadly Medicine exhibit that had come to St. Louis from the USHMM. So today, Dr. Lefrak will speak on the topic of medicine, ethics, and the Third Reich. Thank you.
Can everybody hear me? I don't think I need a... Oh, you do. I'm not sure I can...
There you go.
Okay, now everybody hear me and everything is okay. Perfect. I'd like to thank Dan for inviting me and for giving me an introduction so good that I almost didn't recognize myself. Two, I was honored to be able to shadow a group by one of the docents, Nancy, and she took around a group of students from Priory High School. And I was really impressed how well she handled those students and explained things to them. They were, I think, sophomore students, as I recall, but she did a really terrific job. And I'm glad to hear that your museum is going to get, or our museum actually, is going to get fixed up. But I'm going to want to, this is what I want to talk about, if I can, I see. There we go, medicine, ethics, and the Third Reich. And to give you an overview, a little bit of where I intend to go, I want to show a little bit about the continuity of the Third Reich with previous Reichs. You should always remember that nothing comes from nothing. It's not like in 1932 in the famous movie, the Eskimos came to Germany, did all those horrible things, and left in 1944. There's a strong background for what happened in 1932 and was carried out by Germans with lots of help. And then the way they went away, and they went away slowly. The National Socialist ethic, which we'll talk about, prevailed in German-controlled or influenced areas throughout the world in 1932 to 1945. Now, I tend to use the word National Socialist because, rather than Nazi, because National Socialist is what they were. National Socialist is how they refer to themselves, and National Socialist is what the Germans told them to them. It's the era of National Socialism. So the term Nazi has too much baggage, although it's an okay word, I'm not saying don't use it. But National Socialist describes things, oh, there you go, that was a mistake. Oh, there we go, God punished me for saying that, I guess. but the National Socialist ethic, if you read Mein Kampf, and if you can get through that, in parts, it was really about race and space. Their ethic was their race, which was Nordic, Aryan, must triumph, must be protected and go on, and they needed space, and that space was to take place in, or be taken in, Eastern Europe. They really didn't care all that much, up to the Urals, care much about what they had conquered in the past, that, France and all that sort of stuff. that was punitive, but not, they were not interested in colonizing. The dream was for every middle-class German to have a nice home or castle sort of thing with a bunch of Slav servants, subhumans, and the Jews were to be totally eliminated. There should be no Jews in one way or another, and we'll explain why that is. Jews had to leave, and that was Aryan paradise. Another thing that's sort of interesting that I learned from reading that more Germans became anti-Semites by joining the National Socialist Party, and for other reasons, economics, politics, nationalism, and then joining the National Socialist Party because they were anti-Semites. Now, anti-Semites is an interesting sort of word. Anybody know who coined that word, anti-Semites? Where it comes from? William Marr, German. You know, a journalist, of course. He would fit in with some of our journalists today, undoubtedly. He coined it as a scientific term to characterize Jews. It's a fancy, pseudo-scientific word for Jew hatred. I generally tend to prefer the term Jew hatred because that's really what it is. And anti-Semitism is very strange. I mean, anti-socialism makes sense, anti-liberalism makes sense, anti-conservatism makes sense. But what's Semitism? At most, Semite is a language. And it was never directed against other Semites, such as the Arabs. It was always directed against the Jews. The other important thing to remember that actions against Jews by the Nazi Party or by the German government were almost always cast as preventive in the face of Jewish aggression. The Jews were aggressors out to destroy the Aryans. We have to get separated from them. We have to limit them. We have to keep them out of our society. We have to get them out of Germany and Austria. We have to get them out. The good, which is sort of a nice philosophical term, is defined as whatever furthered National Socialist goals. So the more you work towards getting rid of Jews, you were doing good things. As I like to tell medical students and residents, nobody really wakes up in the morning, very few, to say, how can I do bad today? Hitler woke up every morning and say, how am I going to do good today? Well, get rid of the Jews. Some way, that's good. That's what he feels good. He didn't think it was bad. Otherwise, he would have done it. You've heard, don't hear much of it anymore, thank goodness, the right side of history. Get on the right side of history. That's a classic Marxist phrase, but it's used by all totalitarians who say they know where history's going. Your goal is to advance history, and you better get on the right side of it to advance it. Which in this case meant doing what the National Socialists wanted to do. And as I said, the method that you did that, you knew sort of what the Führer thought. You read Mein Kampf, and you should move towards the Führer. He didn't have to direct you. So there's very few direct orders from Hitler. People moved in his direction. I also want to talk about something we don't talk much about, the role of Jewish doctors and nurses as a resistance to National Socialism, particularly in the ghettos. I tend, maybe others don't, but tend to limit the focus to the perpetrators, particularly in healthcare. And I want to remind you that medicine reflects the society in which it functions. Medicine doesn't operate in a bubble. If medicine operates in a totalitarian state, it sort of picks up and does what the totalitarian state wants. In a libertarian state, it does libertarianism. So medicine is affected by that. And the Shoah, what is called the Holocaust, is carried out predominantly in the East, in the Pale of Settlement. If you look at survival rates after the war, or survival rates of Jews, 80% approximately of German and Austrian Jews survived and got out. The only Western country that had a terrible survival rate for strange reasons, I'm not going to go into it, is the Netherlands. They had a 90% mortality rate for Jews. France was up, 20% of French Jews were deported and died, and things like that. But it was in the East where the Jews were killed and where it was done. So let's go quickly through what Hitler talked about as his Reich, which was the Third Reich. Germans refer to as the era of National Socialism in power from 33 to 45. There was the flag of that designed by Hitler himself. You know, he fancied himself an artist, was trained, spent a lot of time designing that flag to make sure it was proper, the right shape, that the swastika was moved in the right way. Sort of interesting. The colors were picked were red, white, and black to be in tune with, or show was continuous with, the Second Reich, or the Kaiser Reich. 1871, Kaiser Wilhelm I became Emperor of Germany in Versailles after the defeat of the French in the Franco-Prussian War, and that lasted until 1918, when Wilhelm II abdicated after the First World War. And their colors were, that was their flag, red, white, and black. So it gave you an idea that you're seeing the same colors, none of this black, yellow, and orange, or whatever it was that the Weimar Republic had. And the First Reich was Charlemagne began that. That became the Holy Roman Empire, and that was 800, that was a 1,000-year Reich. I don't know how you've heard Hitler say, this is a 1,000-year Reich. And what he was referring to, continuity, I'm going to be like the Reich of Charlemagne. To last for 1,000 years, from about 800 to 1806, when Napoleon came and broke up the Holy Roman Empire, which then moved to Austria, and Charlemagne had his one-headed, I don't say chicken, one-headed eagle, and that became eventually a two-headed eagle in 1404. So it gives you some sense that, yeah, the Third Reich with black, white, and red didn't come from nowheres, and the 1,000-year Reich didn't come from nowheres either. And let's just jump to Nuremberg, Germany, for the most famous thing. People say this is where medical ethics started. That's wrong. But, oops, I'm having trouble with, okay, with the trial, the so-called doctor's trial, whose real name is Karl Brandt, who's sitting right down there in the first, I don't know why I don't see it, so it may or may not be working. There it is. I don't see red so well, but there's Karl Brandt. And if you notice, every seat in the box of defendants is filled. And people say that's why they only tried 23 people. They only had 23 places. But these were the criminals. Most of them were doctors, at least 20 of them. 4 of whom were sentenced to death. 9 received prison terms of 10 years to life. Most were paroled, as was the only woman physician included, Berta Oberhauser from Ravensbrück, who received a sentence of 20 years, who was reduced to 7 years, and then she went into practice in Germany. Well, her license was taken away in 1960. And 7 were acquitted. And the whole reaction of German physicians and the Western physicians was, this is just a bunch of amoral gangsters who were really not doctors, and they were beyond the pale of medical practice. And the West German Medical Association desperately wanted to get back into the good graces of the world and join the World Medical Association. So they sent the representatives to this trial, and that was Mitterschlick, who was a physician, and Milke, who was his medical student. And they wrote a book and a report. And one part of it said, the longer we sat in the courtroom, the more carefully we analyzed the documents and proceedings, we understood that this trial represented random samplings of a general phenomena. That is, whether or not more people deserve to be in the dock than just 23. And they published that as the report of the West German Medical Association, entitled The Dictates of Inhumanity. 10,000 copies were printed, none were distributed. None were distributed. Nevertheless, the West German Medical Association was admitted to the World Medical Association, and things went on. And what they realized from reading this and studying history, what we know today, is this progression of medical killing and public health to protect the Volk. In those days, perhaps as today, prevention, they thought, was more attainable than treatment of disease. You know, the old statement, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. How true that is debatable, but nevertheless, that's what they thought. So the first thing they did very quickly was pass the Volk prevention law, which compulsory sterilization to inhibit the birth of potentially unfit infants. And what was that? Schizophrenic, seizures, you were slow-witted, you were degenerate, all sorts of things. Which ended up, by the end, 400,000 people were sterilized, and it was based on race. It had nothing to do with Jews. This is just the German people to keep them, the Volk, healthy. Then they started very quickly, as soon as the war came, but they had planned for it before, the so-called euthanasia program, with the Tiergartenstrasse 4, named after a building in Berlin, which is now gone, but it does have a thing on the concrete where it was. It says this is what it was. It was first a T4, where the doctors developed the killing process with carbon monoxide, where they could take people in, have them take their clothes, tell them they're taking showers, put them in a room, and kill them with carbon monoxide. And it started for children to eliminate any such infant who was not somehow slipped by the sterilization program. Get rid of them. And they moved it to the adults to cleanse the present. You don't want adults walking around with seizures when you're working to get rid of babies with that, or who could have that, and erase the past. And this is the one you really have to wrap your mind around, because this is what I think people need to understand. And the question that it sort of answers is, how could the Jew be the enemy when he was both the Bolshevik communist and the Rothschild banker? Why is, I mean, the Jew is everything. And the answer was, of course he is, because the Jew is the Genocidal. There's some sort of against the race, against the Aryan. Genetically determined to always go after the Aryan. And for that reason had to be eliminated. The Volkskörper, the body of the people, fascists, all fascists, but the Nazis had this very organic view of society. And you see all these big demonstrations of very attractive young women, hundreds of them playing with balls in stadiums and doing athletic events. So that was the Volkskörper in a real way. It's a metaphor for the German people. They were the Aryans, and the Gegenrasse was afterwards and had to go after the Aryan, because that's how the genetics determined them, although they never found such a gene. And the Fremdkörper, which was the Jew, the foreign corp, and that was how this thing moved to become medical killing of Jews. The success of the T4 program, meaning it killed 70,000 in the year that it was in progress, plus it continued on during the war, and we don't know much about it, but we do know that trainloads of wounded soldiers were brought back from the Eastern Front during the war, and everybody was evacuated from the train stations, and those trains were filled with gas. We know they used it to euthanize their own soldiers and other things. The T4 program became the primary way in which Jews were killed. But the success of T4, that is 70,000 people were killed so the Germans would have hospital beds, was very important, because more so than just the continuities of institutions of personnel. It was real success with the planners of T4 discovered that the German administration, the German people, were willing to accept such a procedure. They didn't raise a storm. There were no resistance to speak of. A little bit here and there. Yeah, Bishop von Dalen spoke out, and that was it. He never spoke out about the Jews, but he spoke out a little bit about this. And took the perpetrators in a bit of a bind, but not much. But the resistance was rare enough to permit a state policy of mass murder of people who were already marginalized, and that was the Jews. If people did not protest when their relatives were being murdered, if grandma was being murdered, if cousin Freddie was being murdered, why would they protest the murder of Jews who were foreigners and weren't so like the Germany anyway? And then, of course, some gypsies, which took a long time to get to the gypsy part. Once the decision had been made to eliminate the Jews, and shooting proved, to quote Himmler and others, inhumane for the shooters. You have a great, in your museum, a picture of what was going on. They didn't machine gun the Jews. They put them in a pit and somebody walked behind them with a pistol. It was one-on-one. And that proved, quote, inhumane for the shooters. We need to find a more humane way. And then the elimination of Jewry became a technical question. How can we technically do this? And the answer was T4. This led to gassing of Jews by 120 of the T4 personnel, about 35 to 50 SS personnel, and a large number of Heavies. We'll talk about the Heavies later, but they were dressed usually in SS uniform, and they were foreign troops from Ukraine, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, etc. And Action Reinhardt was put into place very soon once they were certain of this, named after Reinhard Heydrich, who had been assassinated by Czech patriots. And 4 death camps were built where the only purpose was death. In 20 months between June of 41 and February of 43, it's a very short time, 3/4 of the 6 million Jews were killed. That's 4.5 million. You do that fast. You can imagine in a short time how efficient the gassing process was. The Shoah occurred in a very compressed time and a very compressed pace. It was over for the Jews in about 1942 or the beginning of 43. They were killed. There was some still going on, but that was the major thing. In April 41, and the transition from T4 is the program where 12 physicians were sent to concentration camps to select inmates for gassing in the T4 sites, which are mental hospitals that have been set up with gas chambers. And this was called the 14F13 program. 14F was for concentration camp. That was their number, and they had 1 to be murder, 2 suicide. 13 was death by Sonderbehandling, special handling. And that resulted in 20,000 deaths in April and through 41. But at the same time, 41 to 43, the Einsatzgruppen, the specially trained killers, all led, each one led by a PhD, actually, groups are interesting, began the slaughter of Jews in the Soviet Union by gunfire, and killed about 1 million Jews in that time until this more humane method was brought on board when in October 41, the Nazis knew they had to slaughter en masse with carbon monoxide gas. And Action Reinhardt, basically to eliminate the Polish Jews, carried out, again, as I said, by the Hebrews, which is short for Hilfswillige, voluntary helpers. People who wanted to be on our side and help, and we were more than glad to have the help, and they were really the men of the camps. Vilna began operating with gas vans in December of 41, emptying the ghetto of which it was very efficient. The Jew walked into this castle sort of thing, and then walked down to the basement and right into a van waiting with an open door. When the van was packed with 70 to 75 people. Off it went, and those people were dead and buried. And it killed about 145,301 people. Belchik opened in March of 42. Killed about, in the 10 months it was open, 434,000 Jews. Sobibor, May 42, 250,000 Jews. In Treblinka, almost 1 million Jews. And this was very, very effective. Interesting enough, Infant Erbel was the physician from T4, was the first commandant of Treblinka. He was really good at killing people, but he couldn't get rid of the bodies, and there were bodies all over the place. And so Stangl, who came down from Belchik on the orders of Volachnik, said, clean this place up and let's get rid of this guy, Erbel. And they sent Erbel back to become a family physician in Germany. And I hope it was, good to be a family there. And maybe it was, I don't know. And they cleaned it up pretty well. 1.3 million Jews were killed in 10 months by an SS report in January 43, intercepted by British intelligence. Only 400 Jews ever emerged alive from these sites. Count the numbers that are in there. It's impossible. There were revolts in those camps. Sobibor had revolts. Treblinka had revolts. They were rather, depending how you view it, they were unsuccessful, and that the people who got out were frequently caught very quickly in a hostile environment by Poles or by Germans, and hung or shot very, very quickly. Some did get out, but very, very few. 3/4 of the 6 million Jews were killed June 41 to 43. A half of the total died in the last 11 months. Can you get your brain around gassing 10 100,000 people a day, which Treblinka was able to do. Right? It is unbelievable, but that's what they did. 3/4 of those lived pre-war in Poland, Lithuania, and the USSR, and the Ukraine. That was, of course, there were people sent on from Germany, some who left there, and attacked in France, and other places, but this was a major attack on Polish and Eastern Jewry. All the major camps had also multiple physicians, because they were big camps, who had selected inmates for death in gas chambers and personally killed with lethal injections of phenol, either administered peripherally or directly into the heart. Auschwitz and Majdanek used cyclone. These camps that we mentioned before all used carbon monoxide, and the physician there had many roles, as a selector, as an actual killer, as a researcher, which many of them sort of carried on, patient care of the inmates, which is sort of a misnomer, as well as patient care of the SS. The Germans would have been a lot better off if they listened to the words of Dr. William Hufland, who was the head of the Charity Hospital of Berlin and a well-known physician in Germany in the mid-early 19th century. Whoops, I pushed this the wrong way, I'm sorry. Who said this: if the physician presumes to take into consideration his work, whether a life has value or not, the consequences are boundless, and the physician becomes the most dangerous man in the state. And every German physician, or not every, but many of them, believed in Lebenswert Lebens, life unworthy of life, because their life of the people were the Gegenrasse, who were the Jews, or they were handicapped in pain and not doing well, and they didn't want to live like that. And so that's what happened. And that's his book, or The Power of Physicians Over Life and Death, published in Berlin in 1823. I have some time left. Let me get to the Jewish response to it, and I pardon for this word, Ghettoization. I don't know what else to call it. But as you know, when the Germans rolled into a town in the East, the first thing they started doing, besides killing a few Jews, was to ghettoize the situation. And the response generally was, of course, for Jews, you have to understand that, many of these Jews saw the Germans as liberators and friends, because in the First World War, the Germans were polite. They were there. They defeated the Tsar's troops, and they were liberators from the horrors of the Tsar's anti-Semitism, and they acted like gentlemen. They acted like gentlemen in those towns, as a rule. The Second World War, so the Jews were sort of not ready for what was going to happen. The Germans were supposed to, well, let's all talk. We know they were here before. They were pretty good. The first response was to comply with their orders. A Judenrat was always, there's a lot of talk about Judenrats. A council of elders was appointed. One of the techniques, not done always, but sometimes, the Germans would ask for the community to elect a Judenrat. They'd have one meeting, the Germans would come in and kill them, and then appoint another Judenrat just to show we mean business. The Judenrat appointed the Jewish police, who had a very, very marked, aligned, and difficult record, and other organized activity that a community needs, such as schools and public events. And then work was performed, and everybody thought if they could work, Jews would live. And that the Germans would never kill the Jews because they were working and producing things. Not true. The Germans wanted to get rid of the Jews far more than they needed to work. And then hang on and pray for the time till the war was over. That was sort of one of the responses. It was Abakovna, who's up there on your wall, and one of my heroes, who got up and said at an ASIO meeting, stop this. They will not be happy until they kill every Jew. Do not go, and then he chose, I think, a bad phrase, like sheep to the slaughter. And so the result of that is people started viewing the Jews as, why did you go so quietly? Why did you go so peacefully? Why didn't you fight back? Because it was hard to fight back. The Germans were one hell of an army. Nobody could fight back against them. Number one, you have Jews who were unfamiliar with arms. What could you do? But you could resist in different ways. And Jews did. Just getting up in the morning was resistance. To choose to go to work, to choose to do your thing, that was resistance. There were community activities, plays, books, public readings, poetry, all sorts of things, but depending on the size of the ghetto and who was there, was carried on. A big activity run usually by the Judenrat was smuggling of food and supplies in. The nutrition in the ghetto was terrible. You got nothing to eat, hardly anything, 120 grams of bread a day, to go very far. How many ounces of meat was for a week, and it wasn't good meat or much meat. So kids usually, because they could get in and out pretty easy because they were small, we used to smuggle. And then the price, if they were caught on that, was quite high. But once they brought in stuff, the Judenrat, or the smuggling group, distributed and redistributed the supplies of that food in some sort of fair way that they thought was fair, as well as other supplies and money. There was escape and armed resistance or revolt, but again, you were fighting a very difficult fight that usually became at the Sobibor and Treblinka camps and Auschwitz much later. They all had uprisings. And as you know, the Warsaw, Bialystok, and Vilna ghettos did have armed resistance, but they did not succeed very well against anything else. In fact, the armed resistance in those ghettos led Himmler to declare Action Entefest. Anybody know what Entefest means? Harvest Festival. Enter without the R. Yes. Correct. Entefest. I mistyped. Thank you. So you didn't know what it meant. Harvest Festival. What a good name for rounding up and killing Jews. Beginning in November 43 to remove the remaining Jews in the Lublin district of Poland, and they killed 42,000 Jews. One of the major ways of resistance was medicine and public health. And it sounds boring, but this is really, I think, an amazing story, because the ghettos were designed for a slow death. There was exposure to the elements. The housing was the worst that it could possibly be. Starvation was poor. There was no food, poor nutrition, no eating facilities, utensils. There was a lack of sanitary facilities. Toilets and sewers were horrible. Water for drinking was dirty and not suitable for drinking. There was no hot water for washing, laundry, bathing, and showers. Epidemics were expected and there from overcrowding, rampant infectious disease. The big ones were tuberculosis, because one's immune system wore down, tuberculosis reactivated, typhoid, other dysentery, and typhus. There was nothing to make for clean beds, and there was an absence of barbers for haircutting. So I think you've seen pictures like this. This is the Warsaw Ghetto, pictured by a German soldier going with his officer, Willie George. You get an idea how crowded it was, and people not looking so happy. This little picture, this little market. I think the people look sort of thin, and the children particularly, they're smiling, look kind of like matchsticks. And so nutrition is terrible there. But let's look at medicine in the face of a German onslaught in the Warsaw Ghetto. Medical care was carried out under genocidal conditions. And that's because we Jews have an obligation to heal the sick. We have the belief that every second of life is of infinite worth because we are created by our Lord. And there's a bit of the infinite in all of us. And it's really critical to recognize that. Maybe to carry on that tradition, but I won't get into that. But this central Jewish moral precept of healing the sick, visiting the sick, pekuach nefesh. You all heard that term, to save a life. Pekuach nefesh, you can do away with any commandment to save a life, except idolatry, incest, and other weirdo sorts of things of sexual nature. I don't know where they thought of some of those things, but whatever. So pekuach nefesh is really important, and of course that was met. The Jewish doctors were really faced with decisions with no good outcome, which were life-destroying for both the patients and the physician. And those of us who work in ICUs have a bit of that. I mean, we face decisions that we make, that we think about all night and go to sleep and set up a state. Now we didn't have a good choice. But nevertheless, medical services were established by Jews based on professional conceptions of preventive medicine, hospitalization, medical research, academic study, education, and training. They put a medical school up in the Warsaw Ghetto. Who but the Jews? I say that sort of as a joke, but it's something to really think about. It was an attempt to, quote, bring healing to a drifted leaf. That's taken out of the Vichui from Kol Nidre Night. Healing to a drifted leaf. I wrote it down. While suffering the same circumstances, their brothers and sisters, that is, the doctors under ghetto conditions. In contrast, the German doctors were operating on the National Social ethic of furthering eradication of the Gegenrasse, contributing to direct and indirect killing. So the doctors reestablished medical care in 2 hospitals. This hospital, I don't know how to quite pronounce it in Polish, Shiste, I guess. It was known also as the Orthodox Jewish Hospital, although it was a hospital, one of the great hospitals in Europe. It was in the area that was outside the ghetto, so the Jews didn't have it, and the Nazis got all the equipment. But they reestablished that hospital in multiple buildings in the ghetto. The Children's Hospital of Warsaw, called Burson and Bauman Children's Hospital, which was founded in 1870, was in the ghetto and functioned throughout the existence of the ghetto. And they studied various things, but they literally studied what they called hunger disease. Clinical research on hunger carried out in the Warsaw Ghetto in 1942. It was published in 1946. Someone had gotten out, Applebaum survived. He had the paper, and it was published, and they did a typical medical study. We got these people with these nutrition, and they described the history, the physical findings, the autopsy findings. It sort of makes you think a lot about lots of things. Anna Brota Hella was the chief of the hospital. Stein was the chief of the Udrant. Appelman, I forget, was head of an infectious disease, and I think Julian Fladerbaum was a cardiologist, but it doesn't matter. The great action, they always had this, the great action against the Warsaw Ghetto, that is, to liquidate the ghetto, began on July 23rd, 1942, and I do not think it's a mistake that July 23rd, 1942 was Tisha B'Av, and ended on Yom Kippur, September 21st, 1942. Deportations from the ghetto to Treblinka, which was a real Vernichtungslager, a death camp, an annihilation camp. That's all it did. You got off the train, you were pushed and beaten into the chute, and the chute ended up into the gas chambers, of which there were 6, powered by predominantly Soviet engines that had been captured from tanks and submarines. They were turned on, and they could gas a lot of people very quickly, 10,000 a day. And this thing made a circuit twice a day. Elsewhere, the Hiwis were predominantly, for some reason, from Estonia and Latvia, who did this. Why Estonia and Latvia? They didn't like the Jews much, and Estonia was already Judenfrei, so maybe they had time on their hands. What's interesting, on September 11th, 1942, 1,000 of the sick were deported in one deportation to the Treblinka, and their doctors mostly went with them. Their doctors and nurses mostly went with them. That's unbelievable. Would I do that? I don't know. God forbid I should ever have to make that choice. Dr. Schrader gave a group of children morphine so they could die in the hospital in peace, the children's hospital, and not be transported to Treblinka. That's a tough choice, I suppose. The ghetto medical clinics, which were mostly the children's clinic, stayed after the Great Action until the ghetto was destroyed. And as you're all aware, the ghetto uprising in 1943, with Erev Passover, was led by the Jewish Combat Organization, which was one group, the ZOB in Qatar, the revisionist Zionist group, 250 members, and they held out until 16 May 1943, which is about a month, which is as long as the entire country of Poland held out against the Germans. I just put this up for I don't know, I think you should see their names, the hospital staff. Marek Edelman is a name you probably do know. He got out of the hospital, went to the Warsaw Ghetto, fought in the Warsaw Ghetto, got out of the Warsaw Ghetto, and survived, and then went to Israel. The name that you really should recognize is Janusz Korczak, whose real name was Henrik Goldschmidt, who had an orphanage, very famous for his work with orphans, and he went with his, he was orphaned. The Polish said, come to us, we'll take you over to the Aryan side, you'll be safe. Don't be a fool. Go there, you know what's going on there. And he said, no, I'm going to my children. And he went. And if you notice, there's a fair number of women physicians, 4, which is, I think, interesting for the time. The medical ethical dilemmas in the ghetto are unbelievable. I mean, some people go, well, you got to make medical decisions in bad circumstantial luck, and being in the ghetto is certainly circumstantial bad luck. Tragic dilemmas is another name that they were given, but I like the name, I wish I thought of it myself, by Londa, which is an author of the Holocaust, who calls it choices. You had choices, but none of them was a real good choice. And you were going to be hurt by the choice, and the patient was going to be hurt. And I think every doctor who's worked with really sick people has had close to life-destroying choices made by him or her for those patients. Nevertheless, choices were made. Now we talk about a thing called moral distress. They didn't call that, man. When a practitioner feels certain that the ethical cause, or what the ethical course of action is, but is constrained from taking that action. And they talk about that today a lot about nurses who were told by doctors like me, look, I'm the doctor, you're the nurse, you do what you're told. And the nurse sort of, you don't quite say it that way anymore, but you can still say it. I don't know, I haven't worked in 5 years, maybe I can't. But anyway, the nurse knows what to do, and I'm telling her the wrong thing to do, or him the wrong thing to do. But they have to do it because I'm the boss, and that's a real problem. But that's basically what we're talking about. So I mean, you can divide the dilemmas that the doctors face into 2 broad categories, I think. Dilemmas involving personal risk and dilemmas involving conflicting values. That is, how much risk in my life am I supposed to take as a doctor? The same thing policemen ask, firemen ask. We don't expect our policemen to go, running into a blaze of bullets. But they should run into a few bullets, maybe. But a chance to survive, they expect them to have, not into hope. And the same for firemen, and the same for doctors. This became a real issue during the AIDS epidemic, when we could convince doctors you can take care of people with AIDS, because the risk is not that great, and it's an acceptable risk. On the other hand, am I supposed to, if a patient with AIDS bleeding out, and I have no gloves, am I supposed to put my hands in that blood? And believe me, Dr. Senior and I had lots of blood on our hands at times doing procedures in the hospital. We didn't quite know what the patients were. But that's another story. So that's personal risk. In the ghetto, that spelled out to what extent should they endanger themselves. And you saw it. They went with their patients. That's super heroic personal risk. Doctors aren't expected, I don't think, to do that, but they did. How much did they expose themselves to people with tuberculosis, which was an incurable disease, to typhoid, to typhus? As I said, Korczak and others went their patients to change. The dilemma is, how do we resolve 2 conflicting obligations? One, to preserve life. One, these people come up to me and say, my father and mother are in the hospital, they can't take that train ride. Please give them something to kill them before the Germans come for them and give them a much more horrible death. What am I supposed to do? It's not easy. Doctors were asked to provide transport lists of their patients to their colleagues. Is that okay? I don't know. Depends. The Talmud clearly says it's not if you give specific names. If you give just sort of, well, everybody will narrow the area, it may be okay if your life is under threat. At any rate, let's switch to the Vilna Ghetto, and I'll get done really pretty quickly. Because it really is a great example of public health as resistance. After Vilna was occupied by the Germans, 2 ghettos were established. The first thing the Germans did was stop the Lithuanians from killing the Jews. The Germans did not like disorder. The Lithuanians didn't like the Jews. They figured they could kill the Jews by just beating their heads in with clubs. That was stopped. But then the Germans took out 6,000 Jews and shot them on a nice orderly fashion. That was okay. Then they broke the rest of the Jews into fitness for labor. Ghetto 1 had 30,000 Jews, those fit for labor. Ghetto 2 had 11,000 Jews who were thought not to be fit for labor, either too old or too sick. Me, I go into Ghetto 2, I suspect now. And you know what they did with them? They were liquidated very, very quickly because they were useless eaters, and etc. Before, the Jews had less than an hour's notice before they were herded into Ghetto. They could only take what they could carry, so they were short of everything. What would you take if you had less than an hour to empty your house and go move someplace? What would you do? You'd go, but who knows what you take? And the result was, in Ghetto, personal hygiene was adversely affected by the fact that the inhabitants they weren't rich to begin with, but had limited money. They didn't take all their medicine, some of their medicine. They didn't have clean clothes. They didn't have soap. They didn't have towels. There was very limited supplies of wood for coal and heating. Extremely crowded, as all the ghettos originally were. Population density increased 7 to 10 times. The old sewer system, this was put in the old part of town. They weren't putting it in the nice part of town. Was barely adequate and pre-war, and was overwhelmed by this marked increase in population. So you can imagine what that smelled like and acted like. Most housing complexes had outdoor privies in this area with 2 to 4 seats intended for 1/10 the population. The water system was totally inadequate, and always, but especially in winter, because there was no heating in the water system in the house. The pipes froze and broke, and that was another disaster. Waste removal was not allowed by the Germans, and excrement and waste piled up. The population would have died in several years if the Germans had been patient. But as you know, they weren't. Fortuitously, there were some circumstances that aided the Jews in the ghetto. Before war, Vilna, as you all know, was a center of learning, Jewish learning particularly. It was a Jerusalem, if not only of Lithuania, of Europe. It housed Evo, the Yiddish center. But it also was a key center for medicine. Lots of doctors were there. And in weeks before the ghetto was found, the Jewish doctors knew something was up, and they met the plan for public health in extremis. A gift that, for some reason, the Jewish hospital was included in the area of Ghetto 2, unlike Warsaw where it was not, and was an unprecedented gift because they had a hospital they could staff, was staffed, and they were familiar with, and which had its equipment. There was 130 doctors who organized to create a public health service, they didn't call it that, but really, which involved prophylaxis, healing, and child care. What the Judenrat commissions told the doctors to do: 1, do nutritional support. So they had tea houses, 6 of them, which heated water. And you could get hot water, maybe tea if you wanted, but the hot water could be used for showers, for washing, for bathing, for cleaning. Food smuggling, as I said, and distribution went on as best as it could. There were 8 soup kitchens built where people who had no food could get at least food. And this is sort of amazing. They manufactured vitamins and supplements. They manufactured vitamins B and D, and I'm not sure quite of the method, but it's established. The supplements were mostly calcium and phosphorus that they extracted from dead horse bones, dead horses' bones, I guess. I mean, just think of that. I mean, to me, it's enough that I don't actually cry there for it. Go yay for the Jews. I mean, it's unbelievable. Sanitation improvement, they got trash disposal and waste and excrement by making a deal with the non-Jewish peasants on the other side of the wall that they could use the manure and the trash separately, the manure for fertilizer and the trash for cattle feed. And so 1,000 carts eventually left the ghetto. The Germans allowed that. And maybe the non-Jewish peasants paid the Germans, but at least the Jews got the waste and excrement out. And then they had this Jewish sanitary police that patrolled the ghetto, frequently going to the same place 6 times a day, 4 times a day. It was really a problem, looking at the house, bed bugs, how well you were taking care of yourself. They set up public sanitation and a laundry station using old stoves and things. And they employed barbers to cut hair and beards. As you know, beards are difficult to remove from Jews, but they had rabbinical sanctions for the barbers to do that. It was important because lice like to live in hair. and mice spread typhus, and so you air, and it worked. It was prevention and containment of contagious disease. It was public education by lectures, by posters. I didn't bother with that. And there was also mass immunizations against typhus. They immunized by 1942 22,000. Where did they get the vaccine from? They got it from the Germans, who were so afraid of epidemics always. They said, okay, here's stuff you could use. But the Jews, again, think, well, also they're being nice stuff. What are they giving us to inject to other people? They first injected the stuff into dogs. And if the dogs survived, then it was good enough to use on the people. And so it did work. And it was a huge immunization program. They also developed quarantine stations with frequent doctor visits from people being sent from labor camps. And then on the 3rd to the 24th of September 1943, the Vilna Ghetto was liquidated by SS and Estonian Heavy. And those Jews were all killed. Some escaped into the forest at that time, like Alakovna. Some survived, like my friends, Dan Schuster, his father, Boris Schuster, who was protected by Major Plaga. We think Major Plaga, I'm not sure if that's exactly, who ran the motor pool. That was in Vilna. And I'll be done in just a couple of seconds. I didn't count on all those announcements before I talked. This is just a little. You're fine. Well, I'm making announcements. So after the war, okay, comes what someone called the Fourth Reich. And I would have loved that to be me, but it wasn't. It's this guy, Soling. That's the reference. Medicine in Vierten Reich. They gave that in 1997. But there was a Fourth Reich. That was silence. No doctor was to talk about any of this stuff that went on. There were 30 years of it, from 1945 to 1980 at least. No, because why? Well, there was no powerful group demanding the doctor speak. The Americans, and it was don't soil your nest, was the word. Don't crap in your house, so be quiet. And that was carried up sometimes with threats. We'll say what you do, whatever. There was also a very rapid denazification program for doctors to allow Germans to care for Germans. The British and the French didn't have the money or the time or the interest in keeping their doctors there. American doctors didn't want to stay there in the army. They wanted to bring our boys home, including the doctors. So who's going to take care of the Germans? The Germans. But it really became obvious when two post-war presidents of the West German chambers of the physicians were former SS members. And that's pretty well documented. And the case of Dr. Hans Severin, who in 1993 was the president-elect of the World Medical Association. And they had his Nazi party number, his SS number. His comment to the New York Times was, "But I only joined the cavalry of the SS." I would have told Dr. Severin, my family in Pinsk was killed by the 2nd Cavalry SS in the massacre of 32,000 Jews in Pinsk. But that's another story. They stopped that. He claimed it was the Jewish money that was coming after him and the Jewish federations. Well, the usual, what you'd expect. In 1980, there's always, once a year, German Physician Day. But this year, in 1980, the host in Berlin was a former SA member, Sturmabteilung, the brown shirts, the stormtroopers. The students and young doctors said, that's nonsense. We're going to have a counter-conference, the Gesundheitstag, the Healthy Day, in May of 1980, when students and young physicians, that was really the beginning of Dutch Colley, and others who started really breaking open this silence and what went on with the Germans. And it really opened it up, and the literature began just to pour out. And this is I want to talk a little bit about epidemics of perpetrators, and these are famous Hugo spots, of Hallervorden spots. I will talk a little bit later about Frederick Wegner, who had a disease named after him, Wegner's granulomatosis. Julius Hallervorden of Hallervorden spots. He actually selected kids to be gassed so he could get their brains, and had a great brain collection. Eppinger worked in the concentration camps giving hepatitis, or observed that he knew had hepatitis. 2 people to study hepatitis. Dr. Abraham was a pediatrician who Volk was very revered, and I think he was in East Germany until it was discovered that he had sent a lot of people to the T4 program, and he was removed. There's a picture of Hallervorden, if you're interested. Pernkopf, the Pernkopf Atlas is a real excellent atlas of anatomy. The problem is the pictures looked really fresh, and many of the artists signed their names with Nazi insignias. I can't quite get the thing, but you can see the insignia there between Vienne, when, and look here, and it's got a Hakenkreuz there, a swastika, and some had SS's and stuff. So I went down to the stacks of the WashU library, and there was Pernkopf's Atlas, complete with these sort of signatures. And I looked at the date of publication. It was like 1952. So after the war, they just turned out another edition, and either didn't care or did this. So there's a problem. I'm not a book burner, but I think this should be on our library shelves. So I had to be teaching a course then with about 15 students called Germany Gone Awry. And I presented the problem to them and say, tell me what you think of this, you know, something like that. But I'll never forget one answer from one young man who wrote back, and these were anonymous, so I presume by his writing he was a man, he may not have been. He wrote, I don't see anything wrong with this. Baseball players, when they signed their name, put their numbers down, so this guy was just putting down what he was proud of. This was his identification. Bob Berger was a visitor at the same time, actually, and is a Hungarian survivor and chief of cardiac surgery at the time at Deaconess in Boston. He asked her, don't you have another atlas you could use? Why do you want to use this one? The pictures are so good, and they are so good. And people say the pictures are so good is because he used lots of Gestapo killings, because they were very fresh, and the Gestapo was right across the street. So what I did with the book was get it up on our reserve section. It's sort of locked up. It's got a piece of paper. Somebody wrote up a little statement about the history of the book. Pernkopf himself was a great Nazi, a prime Jew hater, who when he became rector of the University of Vienna, threw out all the Jews, I think, in the first day, and of course, very, very, very quickly. Writer, many of us all grew up knowing about Reiter's disease, reactive arthritis, but Reiter was a large communist, overseeing the National Socialist, overseeing the program of sterilization. And he was held in prison for 2 years to be questioned. Now, these two people are wearing the gowns that Dr. Senior and I were inaugurated in to the American College of Chest Physicians. I'm a fellow of the American College of Chest Physicians, and I'm sort of proud of it. I mean, it's one of my things that it's everybody's fair. I've talked there and written papers there. And in 1989, this man here on the right, Dick DeRemy, who I knew from the Mayo Clinic, and I thought was a nice guy, I thought sort of liked me, brought this man, Friedrich Wegner, to be received the Master Clinician Award. And I was just sitting there thinking, as I always do, when you look at it and say, and what exactly did you do in the war? Myself. I mean, you know, I had that terrible prejudiced, biased reaction. Well, it turns out that Friedrich Wegner was a lieutenant colonel in the SA. He had an office when he was in the Army, 3 blocks from the Witch Ghetto, where he could obviously see the lines going to the trains, which are right there, to the concentration camp, to Chelmno. And he must have known what was going on. He did a huge number of autopsies, experiments on camp people were done in that building. There's no evidence that he did that. After the war, the Poles wanted him for war crimes, but his folder of activities was missing at the office where that was found. And he went back to Germany, was not punished in that academic position, but everywhere you went, if you saw this disease, Wegener's granulomatosis, it sort of was that. And then it seemed to me we should not give this eponym, this honor, to this kind of guy. On the other hand, the fact if we kept his name there, we could always talk about it. Say, well, the Nazis, let me tell you about what's going on with them. He came from a big Nazi family. His brother, Paul Wegner, was on the last cabinet of the Germans before they gave up after Hitler committed suicide. His brother was a general in the SS. That doesn't mean anything about him, but I really thought he should not get the Master Clinician Award, and we should try to take away this name of Wegener's granulomatosis, and I was joined in this, actually by a number of people. But in 2007, I dragged my wife up to Chicago to the meeting of the Board of Regents and managed to convince these people to take away Wegener's award by presenting the data. Madison and myself wrote a thing in jest that we should replace the eponym by the disease name itself, that is calling it ANCA plus necrotizing granulomatosis, and whatever ANCA is fine, but the name Wegener no longer is used. Some of my own friends, one works in pulmonary, always sort of looked at me, and I don't know, he was sort of, I don't think he was in favor of it. But Dick DeRemy, who I thought was at least friendly, wrote this article in Lancet talking about Wegener, and then he said, and then Lefrak demands his pound of flesh, referring me to the Merchant of Venice. And I showed that phrase to a couple of people in my division. I said, do you think this is anti-Semitic? And I'm pretty sensitive, you know. Oh yeah. So it was really interesting. Here was this guy who I knew for 25 years and thought was okay, and he's pulling that on me. I just thought that I still wonder, and I never confronted him. I believe he's gone now, but whatever. Eric Madison was chief of rheumatology at Mayo Clinic, and Alexander Voivod was a European physician who studied with him, and rheumatology and other scientific journals did the same thing, and the name is really sort of gone. So what I try to do is basically illuminate the past, perhaps the present for us may become less hidden. I appreciate your time. I don't know, it's up to Dan. We got time. I went over, I suppose.
We do have time for
Yes, sir.
You mentioned the National Socialist view that Jews, because of their race, wanted to kill Aryans. I have that right?
Pretty much. If you have to kill them, get rid of them.
Do you relate that at all to Catholic Church doctrine?
Blood libel. Well, you know, the church, beginning with, has a long history of continuity, but the church was always very Augustinian. That is, the Jews denied and killed Christ, and for that they must be punished. But they must be kept around to show their degradation, that they no longer were the covenant chosen people, but you couldn't get rid of them because you needed to do that. So that's what I know about that. I would say no, the church position remained Augustinian, okay? Which the church itself called that they may have been anti-Jewish, but not anti-Jewish people. You figure that one out. And you might explain Pius XII. Oh, that's another story. Pius XII alone for now. So that would be my answer. I mean, there's no doubt that the Augustine position is what most of Europe believe. Yes, ma'am.
You said that the T4, I've always thought it was kind of deceptive, and you made the point that they thought they were doing something good. Were any of these things done underground and more deceptively? I always thought the families got notes that said their
Yes,
kids died.
they got ashes back, and they said the kid died of appendicitis, but they knew the kid's appendix was taken out. And yeah, but so it wasn't. But they tried to cover their tracks by saying the person died of natural causes of some sort. They just said they gassed them. But people got wind of the great buses carrying people from their homes or hospitals to the euthanasia centers. The sad story was that if you were home and you were on the list, but your mother was home to protect you, to take care of you, then T4 would make your mother leave the house, go get a job, go out, do something, so they could get to your kid. Yeah. That's true. Yes, sir.
In the early part of your incredible presentation, and I want to thank you, I think, for everybody. It was unbelievable. You made a very quick reference to something that struck me. You said that German wounded troop trains were returning to Germany, and then rather than hospitalize or try to help those soldiers, they gassed all their own soldiers on the train, and I didn't...
They took out the soldiers on the train who were rehabilitable, treatable, whatever. But if you were, then they sealed the windows to those who were litter cases, you know, and gassed them.
So they used the...
We don't have a terrible lot of evidence, but we have eyewitness evidence about that. They were lovely people. Yes, ma'am.
I have kind of an alternative reason or statement. You slammed the Catholic Church.
Oh, really? I didn't say a word about the Catholic Church. Oh.
No, yeah, but your answer. Anyway, I think a lot of the Catholics were appalled at the Jews because of their relationship with the communists and the Bolsheviks, which were anti-God. So I think as opposed to thinking about Ghettoization 2,000 years ago, I think a lot of that wasn't influenced by Bolshevism and the fear of Bolshevism.
I would agree that certainly was Pius XII's fear of communism. The Jews, in many respects, had sided, particularly in Germany and Bavaria, when there was that Soviet republic after the war. But that didn't mean you should kill all the Jews.
I don't think any Catholics ever said they should kill
No,
all the Jews.
I said they shouldn't. No, Catholics did not say that's what I said. For various reasons. But mostly it was the Augustinian position, I think. Others think, I don't know why else, whatever. But never fight about religion. My mother always told me never talk about religion, sex, and politics. And I said, Mom, what else is there? Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, as a young physical therapist in the 80s, I was personal witness to your medical practice and the rigor and the scholarship and the integrity that you brought to it. And I see that you have done so much work around this and about the medical profession's involvement in the Holocaust. And I just want to really thank you for all that work and for all that. I just think it just took a tremendous integrity to try to whatever extent you could, right those wrongs, especially with the ominous names for the diseases and whatnot. I just wanted to
thank you very much. Thank you all. Maybe have a physical therapist. Maybe. If there's no other questions, thank you for your attention. Yes, up.
Go back over. How long did T4 exist before it ran its course? I've been telling people that
about a year.
Found out about it, all that stuff, and they shut it down.
Well, it went on throughout the whole war. It went on in a secretive way, even when Americans were running the German hospitals. There are stories from American doctors with the sister or the nurse coming up and say, we have this patient, we really need to get rid of this patient. And the doctor, what do you mean? Well, we did this all the time. We gave them something, whatever it was. So that sort of undercover killing went on throughout the, even though the major gassing program kind of ended in 1940 after the Germans had 70,000 beds that they needed. That was the official program, but it still went on. And if you look at the back of Hartheim and Sonnenstein and those programs, those institutions, they have a lot of grace. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to make one more announcement. When I talked about being flexible, it's also still winter, so be sure to double check what schools your groups are coming from, in case there's a weather, if there's a school cancellation. Speaking of cancellations, I understand there's a possibility there could be bad weather this Sunday. Yeah, all of you should have from the bulletin, I don't know if you save it, the weather hotline number,
We can send it out again.
which we'll do out as a blast. If you're planning on coming to the event on Sunday, or if you have a tour on Sunday, double check that weather hotline number if things are on the line or if there's a question.
We'll get it to you if you don't have it. We put it in the Docent bulletin, but my guess is.
But there's not going to be bad weather on Sunday. I forbid it. Thank you again. Thank you all.
Alternating days.
Yeah, one day.